The IEM market is huge. Every few months, a company will release another version, adding more confusion to an already confused community. You can buy super expensive IEMs like the Campfire Audio Andromeda and be happy. Or you can buy the cheap and badly accessorized BL03 from Blonde and wax nostalgic. I've been looking for a cheap alternative to the BL03. This led me to the KBEar OS1 Pro. The OS1 Pro is new to the market and costs just about $25. Is it a worthwhile alternative to the pricier gear, or simply another forgettable Chinese IEM? As far as I can tell, the OS1 is a revision of the Opera Factory OM1. Indeed, even though the title says KBEar, Opera Factory is emblazoned on the IEM and the box. I have never heard the OM1, which sells for about $40. I do not know if KBEar has licensed Opera Factory's product or if they're the same entity. It gets really difficult to figure out what Chinese brands are doing, so I'm not going to waste time on that confusion. The OS1 has graphene-coated dynamic drivers. KBEar says that this results in cleaner, more, quote, pure sound. KBEar promises a more resolving dynamic sound signature than, well, they don't really say what to compare to. Furthermore, KBEar says that the OS1 has deep bass and that the IEM is suitable for rock and pop music specifically. The Amazon page also has some generic info about graphene drivers and their creators, which I think is kind of silly. The OS1 is made of resin, or plastic, in other words. The IEM is very light, and I hardly feel its weight. There's a seam that goes around the entirety of the shell, but that seam is near the top of the shell and blends in with the design. The nozzle is long and a bit wide. This results in the IEM sitting well inside your ear cavity and staying fairly secure. The OS1 has a typical IEM shape. It is small enough to fit within the ear, but not so small that it gets easily detached. The shell is smooth to the touch, and even the lettering blends into the plastic shell. It may be hard to see in the video, but the OS1's shell has some angles. These angles are on the top of the casing and is all for show. These angles serve no purpose as far as I can tell, but they are unique. When you run your fingers across the shell, you can feel the ridges. The shell has no sharp edges or obvious faults. The OS1 comes with a cable which includes a microphone and inline remote. This is so that you can use your IEM with your phone if you want. The cable is a 2-pin detachable version. I have seen some awful cables, from Blonde of course, and I have seen some great cables. The OS1's cable is very similar to that of the Blonde IEMs, and I wouldn't be surprised if they are exactly the same, except one has the inline remote. However, just as with the Blonde products, the cable for the OS1 is serviceable, though it is a bit disappointing. KBEar's Amazon page says that the OS1 comes with 3 sets of memory foam tips. Either the company changed their mind and did not update the Amazon page, or memory foam has a totally different meaning in China. You get 3 pairs of silicone ear tips in the box. The OS1 does not come with any memory foam ear tips or a carrying bag. The entire package is fairly basic. The fit and finish of the OS1 is actually impressive for the price. The IEM feels sturdy despite its plastic build and light weight. It fits easily within my ears and does not cause any discomfort. The stock ear tips are agreeable. I'm sure you can find alternative ear tips that you might find a bit more comfortable for you, but the ones in the box do just fine. The stock cable is also suitable for the price of these IEMs. There is no immediate need to upgrade the cable, at least in my opinion. Overall, the OS1 is surprisingly simple yet effective. The build is sturdy enough for daily use. The ear tips are quite usable without needing immediate upgrades. The fit is comfortable to me. The cable is a rehash of the type that Blonde uses. If you're on a tight budget, the cable will suffice, but at some point you may feel that you want to buy a sturdier or better looking cable. In order to test the OS1's sound signature, I paired it with my Low-2-Paw S1. This is a neutral DAC amp, which has several EQ presets for me to try on the OS1. For this sound test, I did not use EQ on the Paw S1 and set gain to high. I used a stock cable and ear tips. I played music through Amazon Music HD. I could not find specifications about this IEM. I do not know its impedance, but the Amazon page does mention a sensitivity of 110 decibels. Regardless, the IEM is really easy to power. I have no doubt that you should be able to get these loud enough if you have a 3.5mm jack on your phone. KBEar says that the OS1 has, quote, deep bass. It appears that the OS1 has a slight sub-bass roll-off and a mid-bass boost. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, the song starts with a low rumble. That sound should be apparent from the very beginning and should linger a few moments. The OS1 did recreate the sub-bass rumble, but it was a bit faster than natural and somewhat muted. In other words, even when I increased volume past safe levels, the sub-bass rumble seemed just a little bit underemphasized. There's a crescendo at the middle of the song when the organ and all other instruments play at full volume. On the OS1, the organ melded with the other instruments. The rolling thunder effect at this portion of the song was audible. All instruments melded with each other and created a potpourri of sound. However, the organ was still distinct throughout the track. When the vocals chimed in at the end, they were about shoulder to shoulder with the instruments. In Conquer by Overwork, the OS1 recreated the rolling marble effect at the beginning of the song. This detail is supposed to pan from right to left to center, and the OS1 just barely managed to do that. There are several drums in this track, and the OS1 presented all of them. There was some melding from one drum strike to the next, but that never became muddy. The drums were emphasized a few steps above neutral, and you could hear the thump-thump above all other instruments in this track. However, it appeared that the sharp energy of drumsticks hitting the drum head was missing. This resulted in a somewhat blunted sound. The synth was not harsh or fatiguing. I listened to several hip-hop tracks including New Patek, Reel It In, Uproar, and Pure Water. The OS1 was not able to fully recreate the sub-bass in these hip-hop songs. The subwoofer effect was muted and a bit distant. It seemed as though the subwoofer was in another room. Mid-bass had a slight emphasis, and it was clear that drum strikes were a few steps above neutral. The vocals were easily 1 to 2 steps ahead of the instruments. Their requisite sparkle was present without any harshness. I switched to Bim Bam Smash from the Bourne Supremacy soundtrack. This song has many drums, big and small. The OS1 recreated all of them with fast transients and clarity. At 1 minute and 15 seconds, there is a pause and a hard drum strike timed to cars hitting each other. The OS1 recreated that sound, but it was a bit blunted, the drum energy not fully recreated. I also listened to another song, a new one on my playlist, Danica Dora's I Don't Want to Leave You. This track starts off with drums. The instruments play softer than the vocals. The OS1 clearly elevated the drums and the mid-bass emphasis was obvious. The drums were louder than all the other instruments, but the vocals were still clear and one step ahead. Overall, the OS1 technically reaches down to the sub-bass, but the transients is a bit faster than natural and there is a roll-off. Consequently, sub-bass is not fully recreated and is never quite loud enough, at least in my opinion. There is a mid-bass emphasis and drums do get a slight nudge ahead of other instruments. However, the drums seem a bit blunted with some of their energy missing. Separation between sub-bass and mid-bass is very good. The two do not meld together and the bass is generally clear. There is no muddiness in this region. The OS1 has what appears to be neutral mids. Vocals are not harsh and all instruments have accurate timbre. In Orla Gartland's song Why Am I Like This, there is natural grain and sibilance recorded into the track. Cheap IEMs have a tendency to accentuate sibilance. However, the OS1 kept Orla's voice neutral. It recreated the sibilance and grain, but did not accentuate either detail. Her S sounds were not harsh or fatiguing. The guitar and drums had true timbre, though the drums seemed to be slightly emphasized. The vocals were about 1 to 2 steps ahead of the instruments. At the end of the song, a backup singer joins the mix. The OS1 recreated that voice as well and kept her voice clear and distinct in the right ear tip. In Want You Back by Haim, the OS1 again recreated the sibilance of the primary singer, but kept that detail neutral. At 8 seconds into the song, the primary vocalist says the word we, and she has a gravelly emphasis to it. The OS1 perfectly recreated this detail. There are two backup vocalists, and the OS1 presented both of them with their individual tonalities. In fact, they were perfectly clear, one in the right and the other in the left ear tips. When the instruments played at full, the backup vocalists melded, but when I paid very close attention, I could still pick them apart. When the instruments became quieter, the separation among all three vocalists returned. The drums, piano, bass, and guitar all had accurate timbre. The drums seemed to be slightly ahead of the other instruments, but did not overpower them. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, the song contains a rhythmic clapping, and the OS1 presented that detail accurately. In superposition by Young the Giant, the OS1 recreated the drums, ukulele, and bass with accurate timbre. However, the bass was slightly underemphasized. The primary male vocalist had a smooth voice, and his sibilance was well controlled. There is a backup vocalist in this track, but the OS1 was not able to recreate his voice, which is true for many headphones and IEMs. Between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds, there are supposed to be sharp intakes of breaths. The OS1 recreated that breathing accurately. I listened to several tracks by the American folk singer Guy Clark. Guy had a very gruff Marlboro Man type voice. He used multiple acoustic guitars in all his songs. On each song I listened to, the OS1 presented the guitars with clarity. I could hear the fine picking apart from the sharper, harder strumming. Guy's voice was gruff, just as it is supposed to be. Overall, the OS1 has neutral mids. I was rather surprised by this performance. Vocals sound true. The OS1 does not smooth out harshness and does not add any. Sibilance is well controlled. Instruments have accurate timbre. The bass does not bleed into the mids, and there is good separation between those two frequencies. The OS1 has a slight treble roll-off. Most of the energy is present, but instruments never become harsh and are typically gentle. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the OS1 recreated the brass and horns with the brunt of their energy. However, both types of instruments seemed a bit rolled off. In other words, they did not have all the power to cut through the mix. These instruments retained their characteristic nasally sound signature, however. The timpani was slightly recessed, not boomy. I could hear group sets and not individual instruments. Even at high volumes, well beyond safe listening levels, the OS1 did not present a harsh sound. In Flight from the City by Johan Johansson, the OS1 presented the piano about 8 feet away from me. The piano's bassier notes were not boomy and had transients that was slightly faster than natural. The cello was smooth and melded marginally with the piano. I could hear the electric buzz effect throughout the track, along with the shifting of wood on the pianist's bench and the creaking of wood as the cello was moved. In Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, the OS1 properly recreated the piano in the right, the drum kit in the left, the saxophone dead center, and the bass somewhere in the back of the mix. The saxophone was very smooth and never became harsh. Some of its energy was reduced, and even at high volume, the saxophone did not become peaky. There was some melding among instruments, but all of them were fairly clear. The cymbal strikes were clear and distinct. Overall, the treble response is gentle. There is some energy missing from instruments like trumpets, horns, and saxophones. However, that does not mean that the OS1 makes those instruments sound off-timbre or odd or muffled. Rather, those instruments simply have a slight curving of their sound. This results in a smooth, less fatiguing signature. The OS1 presents the brunt of the treble energy but keeps about 1 step short of neutral. I have tried to explain the details I can hear with the OS1. In this section, I will merely summarize my findings. The OS1 is not a detail monster. Obvious details are fully recreated. Subtle details are often not. No sound is muffled or muddy. Indeed, one of the surprising attributes of this IEM is its clarity throughout the frequency range. The voices of multiple vocalists, plucking of guitar strings, shrieking of wood, sharp intakes of breaths, electric buzzing effects, these are all obvious details that the OS1 faithfully recreates. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This song has layers of details, including the sound of children playing, wind, rustling of grass, synth, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The Tin Hi-Fi T2 presents 7 to 8 footsteps. The Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus and Blonde BL05S present 6 to 7 footsteps. The Blonde BL03 presents 5 to 6 footsteps. The OS1 presents 7 footsteps. This was similar to what I heard during the sound test. The OS1 clearly represented details that were meant to be obvious, and minute micro details were either missing or very difficult to hear. The OS1 has average to maybe slightly above average soundstage. Sounds are never shoved into your ears and no instrument appears intimate. Vocals are not shouty. The Moondop Starfield has about average soundstage. The Blonde BL03 has slightly below average soundstage. The Blonde BL05S has about average to perhaps slightly above average soundstage. The Tin Hi-Fi T2 has average to above average soundstage. The T2 Plus has about average soundstage. Taken into context, it is evident that the OS1 fares rather well in the soundstage department. It does not sound claustrophobic, boomy, or muddy. Indeed, even the mid-bass emphasis is not overdone. The separation between bass and mids is rather good, allowing vocals to remain 1 to 2 steps ahead of instruments. The OS1 does not present a sense of depth or verticality, and all sounds are stereo left and right. The OS1 Pro has an easy-on-the-ears sound signature, I think. It has a marginal sub-bass roll-off, a mid-bass emphasis, neutral mids, and a marginal treble roll-off. This results in a smooth, inoffensive sound presentation. Indeed, whether I listen to contemporary rock, jazz, hip-hop, orchestral, ambient, indie folk, or movie soundtracks, the OS1 always delivered a safe, comfortable rendition of songs. No, hip-hop songs do not get faithful reproduction as the subwoofer effect is rather muted or barely noticeable. No, orchestral tracks do not have the pitch-perfect energy because of the treble roll-off. But, in exchange, you get a relatively clear sound with good separation between sub-bass and mid-bass, good separation between bass and mids, and treble that never becomes peaky or harsh. Many IEMs have a U or V-shaped sound signature. I know a lot of people enjoy that type of presentation. However, it is not particularly easy to find a more laid-back, smooth-sounding IEM, especially below $100. The OS1's greatest strength is that it provides a competent rendition of music that may not be exciting for some, but may be rather pleasant for many. I know I will get questions about how the OS1 compares to other IEMs. Under $50 you can find plenty of KZ IEMs, but I do not have any of those. But I can briefly compare to the Blonde BL03, 05, Tin Hi-Fi T2, and T2 Plus. The OS1 does not sound like any of those IEMs. Regarding the BL03, the OS1 has reduced bass in comparison. The BL03 has boomy bass that melds heavily between sub-bass and mid-bass. The OS1's bass is clearer and has greater separation. The 03 has forward mids, particularly vocals. It has a noticeable push in sibilance which causes vocals to sound shouty. The OS1 has neutral mids that never become harsh. The BL03 has elevated treble that is a step beyond neutral. The OS1's treble has a slight roll-off. The BL03 is the least detailed IEM of the group being compared here. It is also the most uncomfortable in my opinion. The BL05 is an improved sound from the BL03. The 05 has clearer bass, though it is still elevated compared to the OS1. The 05 does not get boomy per se, and certainly not like the 03. The 05 has a mids response very similar to the 03. Indeed, the 05 also accentuates sibilance, though the sibilance in male vocals is a bit more tame than what I hear on the BL03. Treble response on the BL05 is again similar to that of the BL03. In other words, it's a bit emphasized, whereas the OS1 is slightly rolled off. The 05 suffers from the same fitting issues as the 03. The Tin T2 has sub-bass that is more muted than that of the OS1. Indeed, the T2's sub-bass is sometimes hard to hear. Mid-bass is close to neutral, but probably slightly underemphasized. The OS1 has a slightly emphasized mid-bass. The T2's mids sound a bit thin. That is, because the bass is underemphasized, the mids seem to lack body and support. Vocals on the T2 are about one step ahead and always clear. The T2 slightly accentuates sibilance, but nowhere close to what the BL03 and 05 do. The OS1 has neutral mids. The T2's treble is elevated probably a few decibels at least. Some people find this to be uncomfortable. The OS1, on the other hand, has a slightly rolled off treble. The T2 are fairly comfortable to wear, but the OS1 is more natural fitting, I think. The T2 Plus has sub-bass that is basically the same as the T2. It is rolled off and more so than what you hear on the OS1. The Plus, however, does have a mid-bass emphasis, one that is similar to what you hear on the OS1. Sub-bass and mid-bass separation is again similar between the OS1 and the T2 Plus. The mids on the Plus are one step ahead of the bass and have a bit more body and presence than what you hear on the original T2. However, the Plus still emphasizes sibilance just like on the T2. The OS1, on the other hand, has neutral mids. The T2 Plus has a bit more treble energy than the OS1, but slightly less than what you hear on the original T2. Clarity of treble instruments is very similar between the OS1 and the T2 Plus. I believe that the T2 Plus is a comfortable IEM, but the OS1 has a more natural fit. Overall, the experience of the OS1 is different from the alternative IEMs I've mentioned. The blondes have their characteristic shouty and natural mids. The T2 has its sub-bass roll-off and slightly accentuated treble. The T2 Plus, compared to the T2, has a mid-bass boost and a slight decrease in treble energy. The OS1 is the smoothest sounding IEM of this bunch. The differences are stark compared to the blonde and the T2. The differences are noticeable when compared to the T2 Plus. I am pretty disgusted by the insane level prices for IEMs. Some companies are shoehorning planar magnetic drivers into ever larger enclosures, which begs the question, at what point does an IEM stop becoming an in-ear monitor and instead turns into a headphone that you just stick into your ear? I have had my fill of IEMs, both cheap and expensive. I keep reminding people that when they buy expensive gear, they're not buying better sound, as that is entirely subjective. Instead, you are paying a premium price for brand name and sometimes extended warranty. When you are new to the audiophile world, it can be confusing and dangerous to immediately rush out and buy the most expensive product you can afford. If you do not know what your sound preferences are, then you need to spend time and effort resolving that issue first. But if you listen to some loud audiophiles, then you will get sucked into the black hole that is the never-ending IEM release cycle. So, how does the OS1 Pro fit in? Well, I think that the OS1 does everything competently. It excels at nothing. It does not have the best build or accessories. It does not have the best fit. It does not have the most exciting sound. It does not have the greatest detail Retrieval or Soundstage. But it is smooth, clear, and easy to listen to. This brings us to value. Sometimes people ask me to recommend a smooth-sounding headphone or IEM. I do have some experience in this regard, but it is not an easy question to answer. There are not a plethora of smooth headphones and IEMs with soft treble. The OS1 sets a new standard, in my view. It is cheap and does provide an easy-to-listen-to sound signature. There is nothing offensive about its performance. It has clear and moderately accented bass. It has neutral mids with clear but natural vocals. It has slightly rolled-off treble that prevents any amount of harshness even at high volumes. Now, this sound signature is not to everyone's taste. Plenty of people want a V-shaped sound, and aggressive bass and sparkly treble. You will not get that with the OS1. Other people want a neutral presentation, and the OS1 does not perform in that manner either. If you're new to the audiophile world and want a safe IEM to try, then the OS1 I think is a good option. If you are an experienced audiophile but want to try something different, then the OS1 will be a departure from the typical sub-$100 IEM. I doubt anyone will be floored by the OS1's performance, but at this price range, you just want an IEM that works and sounds good to you. This brings me back to the issue of knowing your sound preferences. Unfortunately, you do not know what you prefer until you have a chance to listen to all your options, but few people have the time and money for that adventure. You can do something, however. You can try to find an affordable option that has different sound signatures so that you can get general impressions. This is where the OS1 makes its existence worthwhile. For about $25, you get everything you need. The cable, yes, could be better, but you can worry about that later. If you listen to the OS1 and you say you prefer more bass, more treble, then you can knock off the TIN T2 and T2 Plus from your list, as neither of those IEMs has a bass emphasis. If you listen to the OS1 and you say you want more sub-bass emphasis, then you might be inclined towards the Ibasso IT00. If you want a more intimate presentation, then you may be inclined towards a warm sound signature, in which case you may want to explore one of the many FIO options. The point is that the OS1 is a reasonable jumping off point. For those who want a smooth presentation that does not sound dark or completely truncates treble, then the OS1 might be the right option for you. In short, yes, I think that the OS1 is value. It is leagues more reasonable in fit, build, and accessories than the more expensive blonde alternatives. And it has a sound signature that is different from the usual suspects in this price range, which invites people to experiment.